Welcome, City of Berkeley Adeline Corridor Draft Specific Plan. Public hearing and Draft Environmental Impact Report.
So we'll go more into that later. Please sign in. But we'll go to roll call. Anyone? Adeline Corridor Plan and the public hearing on the Adeline Corridor Plan, draft environmental impact review. So when we get to those items, we'll have a presentation from staff and then we'll open up the public hearing for comments on both the plan and the EIR. So again, be sure to sign in the back and fill out one of those blue cards. We'll line people up to speak to talk, but to ask you to please turn in the blue card just so that for the official documentation of public comment, they have your name right. Finally, item 3 on public comment. If anyone wants to speak on anything not related to what's on the agenda, so something other than the Adeline Corridor Plan, then now's the time. So please, yeah, come up and introduce yourself and we have 3 minutes public comment period.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I think we're at the end of the day, so thanks for having public comment so soon. My name is Kinshasa Taylor. I'm a lifelong resident of Berkeley. I'm coming here today to talk to you all about an agendized item that was pushed back to you in regards to cannabis festivals. In February, I became extremely interested in acquiring the licensing so that I could be an official cannabis event holder when I found out that the city was interested in doing that. I'm also waiting for the equity program for a micro business license. So I have a couple of things that are just straggling out there in the wind. And at the April 2nd meeting, I guess this item was pushed back to your commission, and I came here to tell you a little bit about the cannabis festival that I have begun to plan in February, and I'm hoping that you all will like what you hear about my event and push the council to agendize this item again to allow us to at least do one pilot event. In addition to being a lifelong resident, I'm also a commissioner for Children, Youth, and Recreation, so I have a value and a respect for our parks. I remember Cesar Chavez being a dump where we dumped our house. My parents bought their house in 72, I was born in 77, but I always got lollipops, and I remember the transition into the park that it is today. And I say that to let you all know that I have a great respect. I know that there were 2 issues that came up with having the festivals, one of which dealt with youth being somehow engaged or and somehow being influenced or something by this event. The state law requires that you have to be 21. If you look at the details of the event, that's something that I'll actually be pushing. Actually, I'll be pushing 25 and up in conjunction with Alameda County Public Health Department, the We Can Wait campaign. And so it talks about brain development and it being something that youth should think about until they're 25 years old. Another issue that was raised with having cannabis festivals was the consumption aspect. And I've been in conversation with Alameda County's Patricia Books. She is the, as well as Mr. Sweeney, who's a Berkeley resident, and he sits on the state commission. And prior to finding out about some of those issues, again, like I said, my lifelong stewardship for the environment as well as being a resident here, I had already, if you look at the map, I had already found an area for smoking that would be on the concrete area, because if it's a cannabis festival, I anticipate people would do more than, edibles or vaping or tinctures or, there's multiple ways, but I wanted to make sure that there was a safe access. In planning this event, I've been working with my childhood friend who is the head of the marijuana task force for the city of Oakland. He is currently writing an ordinance with the city of Oakland. He helped me to devise this plan in February to ensure that that my plan was in line with the state rules as well as some of the rules that Oakland had been considering, as well as some of the things he had also seen. And so that's where he had suggested that we have a smoking area. And pretty much, I guess that's pretty much it. Those were the two concerns. I addressed that. And also the natural preserve area. That was an area that I had also blocked off. And for the event, it would be blocked off for the public. I think one of the other concerns were the owls that live there. So I think that if we have it blocked off and we have an open or off-leash dog area adjacent to that natural area, I think humans, maybe on a little cannabis, would be, kind to the owls as well. So I hope that you all consider this. Please, please, please urge council to shift this from your commission back into their hands. As you can see, we were planning to do the event in July, but I'd like to get it done sometime over the summer and hopefully get this agendized before council goes on break. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks.
Okay.
Do I give a or do I not?
Great. Anybody else have any public comment to make on items not on the agenda? Okay. And we'll go to planning staff report.
So next commission meeting, we are going to have at least 3 items, maybe 4 on the agenda. I'm going to start reporting on the agenda items in the future at this point. So comprehensive cannabis public hearing is going to be at the next meeting. Unbundled parking public hearing, so continuation of parking reform. We are thinking about getting a presentation on green trip for TDM, also related to the parking reform. And then we got a referral on opportunity zones, and so we want to bring that referral to the planning commission for a discussion and maybe some preliminary thoughts. That's what we're planning for this meeting.
Chairperson's report, nothing other than to say thank you to Rob Kaplan for chairing the last 2 meetings. Committee reports. We didn't actually establish, there was one subcommittee meeting since the last planning commission meeting, and we actually did not establish somebody to report back on that. Elisa, would you be willing to do a staff report back on the subcommittee? We didn't designate a chair or anybody to report back on that, so I don't know. Sure. Sorry, yeah.
Thinking about the next item. So the subcommittee had its first meeting on May 21st. And basically the crux of what we talked about, I did a very high level overview of the plan, but we really wanted to establish, what the work plan was and meeting, logistics. So we have settled on the next meeting, which is going to be June 18th. And that's going to be more of a focus and a deep dive on the land use and how affordable housing proposals in the plan, as well as related implementation actions. And we'll have city staff there, as well as one of the members of our consultant team, Rick Jacobus, who did a lot of the work in terms of feasibility studies of the proposed zoning proposals, as well as the public land affordable housing proposals. And the July and August meetings have not been set yet.
I'm sorry, which subcommittee is that? Oh, sorry, that was the Adeline Corridor Subcommittee. Sorry. I think I forgot to say that. Any people also met. That's the last time. So this is the joint subcommittee on the implementation of state housing law. This is a committee that includes members of the planning commission, the SAB, and CAP. And I'm the chair of that subcommittee. Our most recent meeting focused on density bonus and density standards. So we reviewed a new work plan by Octopus, the consultants that the city has hired to review development standards and come up with recommendations that might inform a discussion on creating density standards. So we'll hear a little bit more tonight, I think, about what density standards might look like in a plan, because we're looking at doing an outline corridor plan, and this subcommittee brought up the question of what that he did this very thorough GIS analysis of what existing building types in the city of Berkeley are, and so what is kind of the existing density of our city, because we've never actually had density standards before, a dwelling units per acre type calculation. So we kind of used GIS data sets to calculate those. All the information, including his presentation and the optical support plan and the staff memo about density bonus is up on the website. There's a separate website for Jason or is it on the plan? It's separate. So if you Google Joint Subcommittee for the Implementation of State Housing Law, Berkeley, in case there's one in other cities. And if you can remember it, you should be able to find the agenda material there. Great. And is the next ZORP subcommittee meeting been scheduled yet?
No, actually, for future agenda items, I was going to say that ZAB has to select their ZAB subcommittee, and that's going to happen at June 13th meeting, and after that, we'll plan the July ZORP meeting.
Okay, great. So we'll get an update on that in the next meeting. Okay, that's it on committee reports.
Didn't hear any comment. Is there a motion?
Oh, sorry, there are comments.
Just yell.
Line 71 on page 7, or however many pages it is, I think it's more accurate to say reduce or eliminate. I don't think we necessarily said that we want to eliminate all parking areas.
Jeff, did you ever hear that?
Oh, I just had a comment that the meeting adjourned at 9:41, but the length of the meeting was 2 hours and 57 minutes. So we started early.
Started early?
Did we start early?
No. Okay.
Technicality, I guess.
All right, so I'm taking, let's amendment to correct the time.
Started at 7:04.
Okay. To correct the length of the meeting.
And just for consistency, we seem to change how we list people as whether they're absent with a replacement or not. In prior meetings, we would still call someone absent despite having a replacement, and now we have people as not being absent. So I like this way better, but it's just inconsistent across the meetings. We should adopt this standard if this is new.
Yeah, we look back at previous reports, and this is the way that they were recorded reports were interesting. Go back to this.
Okay. Seeing no further comments, is there a motion with amendments?
Motion with amendments.
Okay.
Second.
Jeff, Rob, all in favor? Aye. All right, I will abstain. Okay. Well, let's see. Yeah, actually, so the next item is future agenda items and other planning related events. So I think that's back to you all.
So I did forget to introduce our newest member of the planning commission, the planning staff, and Katrina Lefebvre. I'm so excited. They're new assistant planner, Michelle clerking, planning commission meeting. So welcome. She's been here for a couple of days and we love it. And then I do have a number of things coming up that I wanted to let you know about. So the Southside EIR, it was released in late, I think it was released on May 29th, and we have a pre-bid meeting on June 12th.
Could you hold that mic closer to your mouth?
Closer to my mouth? Is that better? Okay, so the pre-bid meeting for the South.
Southside EIR RFP, you mean?
RFP.
Okay.
Yes, what did I say? EIR?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Pre-bid Southside RFP. Well, it's an RFP for an EIR.
Yes. Right. Yes.
So that meeting is going to be on June 12th. There's going to be a meeting, a special meeting of the Canvas Commission on June 13th, and that is to go over the equity program that's being proposed. On June 13th, that same night, ZAB is going to be appointing the ZORP subcommittee members. On June 7th, the APA is awarding the city of Berkeley some award for the small business zoning ordinance amendments that you guys helped facilitate back in earlier this year. And on June 18th, City Council is going to have a work session on the policy work plan. So policy referrals. So that's June 18th, City Council work session. So those are some of the exciting things that are going on in June.
Great. Then we'll leave the mic with you all because the next agenda items 9 and 10, we're going to get a staff presentation. And then
Good evening, commissioners and members of the audience. My name is Elisa Shen. I'm with the City of Berkeley Planning Department. I'm excited to come tonight to present the draft Adeline Corridor Specific Plan and the draft Environmental Impact Report. This represents hopefully a good reflection of the 4 years of community input that we've received, as well as a balance, because all the input didn't necessarily, achieve a consensus necessarily, but that it achieves a balance as well as leaves ample room for the community and the commissioners to discuss some meaty policy questions. And also, it is a draft, so we look forward to your comments in the next coming weeks and months to be able to improve the draft. So the plan, as many of you are well aware, as you can see from the map here and in the plan, it covers the immediate area along about approximately 1.3 mile stretch of Adeline Street from the Berkeley-Oakland border up to where Adeline Street intersects with Shattuck Avenue, and includes the area around Shattuck Avenue from about Derby Street to Dwight Way. So for tonight's presentation, I'm going to briefly go over the planning process, where we've been, where we're going, also give an overview of the plan, an overview of the draft environmental impact report, and then open it up for comments and questions. I also have members of the consultant team with me to help listen to everyone's comments and where possible can chime in to provide clarifications. And that is Aaron Welch from Hrng Associates, and Carly Kaufman and Abe Leader from Rincon Consultants, who prepared the EIR. So as you can see from this map, the purple areas are priority development areas that are designated in the city, and these areas were designated in 2007. We started this planning process, the meetings, in 2015, and was made possible by a PDA grant that was awarded to the city for planning in these areas that are along corridors with high-frequency transit and, for example, fixed rail as among some of the criteria. And you can see in the circled area where our plan area is, it includes technically 2 priority development areas, Adeline and South Shattuck. So really quickly, we started this planning process, as many of you know, because you were part of this planning process in 2015. We kicked off in the spring with 4 months at the Firehouse Art Collective, and had people come in and talk to us about the issues in the area, fill out surveys. I think we had over 500 people come through and fill out, and then other people who submitted 1,100 surveys. We did a report and studied existing conditions. Following that, in 2017, we started presenting different options and concepts that were based on the feedback and the technical analysis that we did. If you'll recall, we had a couple different community workshops, and we also held open houses, 2-week open houses in person as well as online at the Ed Roberts campus, that were focused on different concepts as well as a deeper dive in terms of different ways that we could redesign the right-of-way. And so that brings us to where we are now, where we have our draft plan and our draft EIR. So moving forward, this is all information that is on the plan on the project website, but we have a period of public comment through July 5th, where we're taking comments on the EIR and getting preliminary comments on the plan. We're doing a lot of community outreach. Some of you came to the community meeting that we had last Wednesday. I've been going to a lot of other commissions and making presentations. And as we mentioned earlier, we had our first meeting of the Planning Commission Subcommittee. And the subcommittee's charge, they'll be meeting throughout the summer, is to really take a deep dive on different aspects of the plan and prepare a recommendation for the full planning commission to consider in the fall. So those are other opportunities, to provide input and also, get into more detail about the plan. After we get these initial comments, and during the summer, staff and the consultant team will be reviewing those comments and preparing responses to the comments on the environmental impact report. We will also be, then sharing back those comments to the Planning Commission subcommittee, and we were also planning on holding, more community, another community engagement, more community meetings in the end of the late summer or early fall. And then this calendar also shows that, after we bring come to the full Planning Commission and they talk about what their recommendation is, their charge is to make their recommendation to the City Council, which ultimately is the body that will certify the environmental impact report and make a decision about adoption of the specific plan or any kind of revisions to the plan. And that will probably happen with the City Council end of it this year or more likely early next year. So this slide just gives you a sense of the overall contents of the plan. The introduction of the plan just summarizes what the planning process was, as well as gives some context in terms of the plan history. A lot of people who have been in the neighborhood for a long time and or are aware of the history know that this area was shaped by the key route system, and that's part of the reason why the right-of-way is as wide as it is. It was also an area that was home to Japanese American immigrants, as well as home to a significant cultural center for African Americans in the area. And Chapter 2 goes into that, as well as some of the challenges and opportunities that the area has faced over the recent decades. The next chapters are topical chapters, chapters 3 through 7, that really revolve around some of the key issues that have been raised by the community. Namely, what we heard was a concern about the lack of affordable housing, especially at low range, needing housing, across the gamut, but especially at the extremely low range of housing, and talking about displacement, measures to address displacement. We also heard about the need for public space and green space, because South Berkeley, for example, has a much lower concentration of green space and public space than the rest of the city. So those are just some examples of what the topical chapters cover, and then we have a final chapter, the implementation chapter, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So just starting with an overview of Chapter 2, what the plan vision really looks at, and what we try to use as a filter in terms of all the development of the plan recommendations, was really focusing on how can this plan and the recommendations uplift the existing community and existing institutions and organizations. It really, we heard loud and clear from the community, this isn't about, transformation and revitalization to bring, public improvements that are going, or development that, doesn't focus on how do we, really serve the existing community. So the vision, as you'll see in Chapter 2, it focuses on, how to nurture and grow a healthy community that gives access to affordable housing and tenant protections, and recognizes and celebrates the history, the people, places, and institutions that makes the area what it is today, as well as provides economic opportunity and that is walkable, green, and accessible to persons of all ages and abilities. The plan has 5 over each chapter. The topical chapters have 5 strategic goals, and those goals and each of those goals have underlying policies and strategies, and you'll see that in one of the attachments to the staff report. There's just a matrix that includes, it just pulls out all the goals and all the policies in there, so just as a handy reference. I won't go into those in detail right now, but it also establishes a framework of this concept of plan sub-areas, and it divides the plan area into these 4 sub-areas. So there's a South Shattuck area, which commonsensically is the portion of South Shattuck from Dwight to Derby. There's a portion that we're calling North Adeline from Derby to approximately to Ashby Avenue. There's the area around Ashby Bart, as well as an area that we're calling South Adeline. We use this as a framework to be able to guide some of the policies, and the standards and the actions are geographically specific, but some are not. Some are plan area wide, but this is helpful in terms of a different physical context where we can point to different either land use standards or right-of-way changes. So the plan has many different policies, many different ideas. What we're trying to do right here is just distill them down into the 5 major ideas of the plan. So what you see up here, I'm just going to go into them briefly. The first one is about affordable housing. And what the plan does in chapters 3, the land use chapter, chapter 4, the housing affordability chapter, and with some background information in the appendices about the zoning as well as about the affordable housing and feasibility studies, what it does is lay out an ambitious goal of saying that 50% of all the new housing units should be affordable at a range of income levels. And how it does that is focusing, one, on a policy of prioritizing public land, namely the BART parking lots, because those are really the largest publicly owned parcels in the area for affordable housing, as well as what it does is realizing that the goal can't be achieved by public or private land alone. Public land will definitely move the needle greatly, and a little bit more than necessarily what we can achieve from private land, but we also have new zoning that changes the zoning standards to incentivize, create tiers to incentivize on-site affordable housing. And it does that by introducing tiers where the existing zoning might say, you can apply for a bunch of different use permits to change any of the development standards except for the FAR. The maximum floor to area ratio is 4, so that really is the limit of the existing zoning. But right now we're introducing steps and limits that are associated with different increasing allowances of units or density or height. So we can take questions, but I won't get into the specific numbers right now. The second big idea relates to the Ashby BART station, and basically this is the area that really can substantially advance all 5 goals in the plan area, and it's envisioned as a new vibrant neighborhood center that really brings together the different sides of the neighborhood, what was once split apart by the construction of the BART, and is envisioned with substantial affordable housing, economic opportunity, and community serving uses and public space, and envisions city and BART working a lot over the next year, especially 2 years, to establish what will happen there, as well as in the other BART station of the city in North Berkeley BART. So I'm just going to highlight what the chapter talks about and related to the Ashby BART. Specifically, it includes 7 different objectives, and that's in the land use chapter in policy 3.7. And these objectives relate to, 6 of them relate to development parameters, such as a goal of 50% affordable housing, and then development parameters related to building height, parking, public space, bicycle and pedestrian connections, public art. As you know, or as you may know, there's also a state law, Assembly Bill 2923, that requires BART to develop standards and guidelines by July 1st, 2020 for its properties. The city is moving in parallel with planning efforts related to planning for future development at North Berkeley BART and the Ashby BART station. The City Council recently adopted goals and objectives for North Berkeley BART, and similarly, the Adeline Corridor Plan really takes a huge step forward with these objectives in terms of, keeping both planning for both stations moving forward. There's a lot in terms of the next steps. For example, developing a memorandum of understanding, an MOU with BART in terms of how we'll proceed, as well as other steps in terms of creating the development standards. The seventh objective here really deals with process and engagement, and the seventh objective talks about the development of a station area advisory group. And so that is also something that is, needs to be developed in terms of process, composition, roles, etc. But there's a lot more discussion related to Ashby-Bart that needs to happen, related to, specific affordability levels. The objective talks about like a civic plaza that can, be a marketplace for the Berkeley flea market, potentially the farmers market, and supporting other institutions and events such as Juneteenth. And so, depending on where the conversation lies, like that needs to be a detailed conversation in terms of the heights, the densities, as well as the levels of affordability. That conversation, and then the local funding and subsidy that's needed depending on where we land in each of those categories, that is something that needs to have like a deeper community conversation. So as you can see, like we lay out these objectives, but there's a place for that detailed conversation that's coming up. The third big idea relates to creation of a business improvement district. The economic opportunity chapter focuses on a lot of different strategies in terms of uplifting existing institutions like the flea market and the farmers market, and providing technical assistance like the Office of Economic Development with its consultant is doing now, Optima Business Boot Camp. And also, but we decided to highlight this particular recommendation as a big idea just because the property-based bids have been really successful in other areas of the city, and what a property-based bid can do is basically, with its assessments, can collect a sizable budget, that can really create an institution with staff that can help spearhead some of the recommendations that are in the plan that's over and above what city staff can do, that is devoted to the entire city. All right, and then finally, there's a big idea in terms of the right-of-way redesign. What the right-of-way redesign, and again, it's a very high-level conceptual design that needs a lot more refining. But right now, what the right-of-way redesign does is throughout this planning process, we got input in terms of, how do we reimagine this wide right-of-way, and how can we reallocate the pavement of the right-of-way to be able to really yield more benefits for the community in terms of better shorter crossing distances, better safety in terms of crossing the street, bike lanes, and potential for more open space or public space in general. Just want to highlight that in terms of the right-of-way concept, you may have noticed, or you've been part of discussions that in the North Adeline segment from Derby to Ashby Avenue, the idea is to take the extra or surplus right-of-way and move it to the west side, so that there is a continuous potential for plaza or open space in what we're calling the southern part, or the South Adeline segment, from Adeline and Martin Luther King to Adeline and Stamford about. The proposal is a road diet, a reduction from 3 lanes to 2 lanes in each direction, which allows for more space, a larger plaza or open space that potentially could be for the farmers market if they don't move, and or other programming or potentially other community-oriented facilities. And the last big idea relates to, again, this idea of supporting improvements that help existing institutions. Like I mentioned, the flea market, the farmers market, Juneteenth, as well as potentially future institutions like the African American Holistic Resource Center. And I can answer questions about that, but there's more detail about that in the plan. And then one thing I just wanted to highlight is Chapter 8 in the plan. Chapter 8 is the implementation chapter, and what that does is provide specific next steps in the near term and responsible parties and potential funding. What the plan, this chapter and the action plan is designed to do is promote transparency and accountability. And some of the ways that it does that is a commitment, whether we establish a cross-departmental city implementation team, planning, public works, economic development, housing. Often, each department, this is an effort to make sure that, the work of the different departments, so many of the recommendations in the plan are cross-departmental. So we want to make sure that we stay in coordination with our colleagues in terms of grant opportunities and other planning. We're also committing to an annual progress update to council, as well as our target is to develop and adopt general plan and zoning amendments with this plan, with adoption of this plan. Working with BART on the Ashby BART next steps and some other implementation steps. So when the city does a plan like this, what the state law requires, the California Environmental Quality Act requires, is that we do environmental review. So that's why we have the draft environmental impact report. So I'm going to just talk really briefly about the environmental review process, the projected development or build out that's being analyzed, as well as quickly talk about the alternative analysis. And so you can see from this flow chart, the city prepared a notice of preparation for an EIR last July. We had a scoping meeting. Right now we have the draft EIR available for your comment. After that, like I mentioned, the city council is going to consider certification of the final EIR and make a decision about the specific plan. So what this shows is just because the EIR needs to make
with young kids in the audience, so if you all want to move towards the front, do we need to make a motion for public hearings? I always forget. Okay, we'll entertain a motion for a public hearing on the draft environmental impact report.
So we're jumping ahead.
So we'll move in, sorry. To clarify, on the agenda, there's items 9 and item 10. What we decided to do is to have staff present on both of them, on both the Adeline Corridor Plan and on the draft environmental impact report. So we're gonna open a public hearing now to accept comments on either the plan or the environmental impact report, or if your comment is relevant to both, that's fine as well. So just for that clarification. So with that, motion to open public hearing? Whoever you want to pick.
Whichever one is first.
Okay, I saw Rob and Mary Day. First and seconded, all in favor? Okay, so opening up the public hearing for folks who want to line up and give public comment, and the microphone's up there. We'll do 3 minutes per speaker.
I'm waiting a dramatic moment because we have a petition coming in from the next room over with 1,000 signatures in support of housing at Park. My name is Ariella. I've lived in Berkeley for 20 years and I'm a member of South Berkeley now. Our volunteers have gone out and canvassed and gotten 1,000 signatures asking that you designate Ashby BART as a high priority site for housing. We're going to be going to the BART Board of Directors meeting next week to make sure that the city and BART assign staff to develop requests for proposals to build housing, public open space, better transit, and safer streets. And I wanted to communicate to you the urgency and the excitement that I heard from people when I was canvassing for these signatures. People are passionate about ensuring equity and diversity in this project, that there will be anti-displacement programs for our neighbors. We want to maximize housing for all, including all income levels, but especially 50% be affordable. We need a permanent public open space so that the flea market is not displaced. And we want safer streets and better transit. There have been so many pedestrian and bicycle accidents recently. Our streets are just too wide and too fast. While it appears that the framework of the Adeline Corridor Plan generally supports these goals, we feel that there are major revisions that need to be made to the Corridor Plan draft, as well as the EIR, so that this vision is actually feasible and can be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sublime Hauser. This is Adira, and that was a tough act to follow. This is quite a dramatic moment we're standing in front of, but we also support more housing, more pedestrian-focused streets and amenities. It's time that we actually walk the talk of Berkeley progressive values and create housing where we know it makes sense along corridors in walkable neighborhoods, and so that more people can enjoy a walkable life that the residents who are here, who are lucky enough to live here, already enjoy. And this is incredibly urgent, so I ask you as our leaders, please support more density, more housing, and this plan could go a lot further as far as we're concerned. But thank you for taking this bold step.
Hi, my name is Topher Brennan. I am in District 3, right between Adeline and Shattuck, and I have a few comments on the plan. First of all, I think we need to make Adeline one lane of traffic in both directions. As I said, I live right next to Shattuck. The section of Shattuck I live next to is 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, and that section of Shattuck is not safe for pedestrians. And I think if we're serious about walkability and bikeability and pedestrian safety, Adeline needs to become one lane of traffic in both directions. I'm also concerned that both in terms of housing, the plan is not ambitious enough and also doesn't have what's needed to meet even the relatively modest goals. The slide I saw from the presentation said 250 units relative to no plan of additional housing would be built. I don't think that's nearly enough given the housing crisis we're in. And it's not even totally clear to me how this plan is going to lead to building even 250 additional units, because it actually lowers height limits by a foot. in large sections of the area, if I understand correctly, and doesn't really seem to do what's needed in terms of allowing density if we're serious about building more housing. I'm also concerned that what we're going to see is we're going to see a requirement passed for 50% affordable housing, and then the funding for that won't be there, and then we're going to get 0 units of affordable housing. So if you're going to pass a 50% affordable housing requirement, you need to make sure that the funding is there. If you put a gigantic housing bond on the ballot to do that, I will vote for the housing bond. But my question would be, is that bond going to happen, and will enough people, other people vote for it? Because if not, I think you're going to, if you want a certain number of affordable units and you can't fund it through a housing bond, what you need to do is you need to build more market rate units and require those to subsidize the affordable units, because that's the only way you're going to get the affordable units you want. A final point is I was deeply confused by the part of the staff presentation that said not doing the street redesign would be more environmentally friendly. I think if your analysis framework that you're using for an environmental impact report says that fewer cars and more walkability and more bikeability is a negative environmental impact, you need to change the framework you're using to evaluate environmental impact, because I don't know, maybe that's a framework that made sense 60 years ago, but if we're serious about climate change and we're serious about CO2 emissions, then we need to adopt the perspective that what's good for the environment is fewer cars, more walkability, more bikeability. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janina Angel Bath. I have a storefront called Empress Vintage in South Adeline, right on the border of Oakland and Berkeley.
Oh.
And there's the Alchemy Collective. And I have been in this neighborhood for about 11 years now, starting out at the Ashby Flea Market, selling there. Then I had a tiny storefront in the Firehouse Art Collective, and now I'm over on Alcatraz. And I'm currently at high risk of displacement. And I just wanted to mention that land use as part of my store. I have a garden space in the back that I've completely revamped, and for the past 5.5 years have been giving that to the community to come in. We've had workshops, artists, musicians, many events back there. It's a lonely land. I've always wanted to share it, and this is also being at risk of being taken by potential tech company and my landlords who want me to leave with no reason given to me. And so I'm just wondering in the proposal, what is helping existing businesses, small businesses, artist-run businesses, women-owned businesses, people of color-owned businesses that are at risk of technology displacement that the whole Bay Area is experiencing right now? And where's the community support for that, and where can I find resources for my situation? But not just me, I want to be an advocate. I always have been an advocate for this, and I just wanted to introduce myself here, and I hope to stay in touch with people. Thank you.
Hello, commissioners and guests tonight. My name is Alex Nolan, and I am the principal leaseholder for the building where the Firehouse Arts Collective used to dwell on the corner of Adeline and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And so being there since 2017 in July, when I took a 15-year lease on the property, I've noticed increasing traffic incidents, accidents in front of my property. In the last 6 months, there have been 3 major car collisions that have pushed vehicles onto the pedestrian right-of-way, of which in the last month and a half, two of our trees in South Berkeley have been knocked down. Just on Saturday evening, another other tree was impacted by a traffic collision where police pursued a vehicle that ended up in the corner of my building. Well, it didn't quite hit the building, but it was on the sidewalk. I'm also the board president of Berkeley's, other than Kalal Institute's only fine art nonprofit, Local Artists Berkeley. We just received our 501c3 status on Thursday, so we're very excited about that. Anyhow, we have this property in South Berkeley that we are excited to conduct an AUP process to become a beer garden, also a restaurant. We are saving Smoke Berkeley from its landlords taking eviction of its property actually next month. And so we are going to be housing Smoke Berkeley, a beer garden and arts center right here where the Firehouse Arts Collective used to be. This was also previously the Berkeley Police Department's transportation division. So I am also a contractor. I'm actually part of 3 different companies that work out of this building. I do a lot of work with Public Works. I do a lot of work with Parks and Recreation's waterfront. I also do a lot of work with all of the bids, including the T-bid and the DBA in downtown. So I've initiated several proposals to Public Works and Parks and Recreations over the last few months for improvement of our planters, which my company has built all of the downtown planters in that revitalization project. So we're very interested in being involved in all facets, both in public art and in also development and planning and improvement to our open spaces over the coming years. Currently, I am trying to get a permit, and it would be an encroachment permit because of my property's proximity to this particular site. But given the proximity and the frequency of accidents, I'd like to do raised planter beds on the frontage, right in front of the AC Transit bus stop, also adjacent to our property to prevent pedestrian incidents where these collisions could actually impact both my business and my tenants, and also people walking by.
My name is Bonnie Haruki. I live on Oregon Street by the Tool Lending Library. I've lived here for 25 years. And my biggest question is, how does this address emergency preparedness? How can all neighbors be organized? What is in the plan to address what happens during the earthquake happens, so fires? How do we get more, if we're narrowing the streets, I'm all for that, but how do we get emergency vehicles in this decreased space? And services, how does this address a larger need for healthcare, schools? How is this in the plan? I haven't seen this. Is it just supposed to happen? And also with BART, I'm all for less cars, but is BART going to increase the capacity of BART cars and not increase the fares? So those are questions.
Hello, my name is Todd Darling. I live here in the neighborhood, near Shattuck. I would like to point out a couple of things as you have to deliberate going into the future, trying to make a plan that is far-seeing. There's lots of things that we simply cannot anticipate. PG&E is now bankrupt. 4 years ago, no one could have imagined such a thing. So solar rooftop power generation is now becoming critical to the functioning, potentially for the functioning of the city, particularly the functioning of the city during an emergency. So if we build a bunch of tall buildings next to a bunch of available rooftops for solar power, we're going to lower our sustainability capacity, our resilience in effect. Traffic is a big problem, but a major cause for the increase of traffic is, of course, Uber and Lyft. So we've got disaster capitalism being the biggest contributor to our traffic problem. So going down, no pun intended, the road of changing our streets is going to be, there are a lot of very difficult questions to encounter. I think that our sustainability has to be factored in to a much greater detail than has been able to, just because we've not really been required to, or we've not had the opportunity to face the dilemmas we're being given right now with climate change and things like PG&E going bankrupt. Who would have figured that? The other thing I would just like to say about the setbacks and density and things like that, I think there is no question that if we go past 4 stories, and if we start eliminating the setbacks, that the entire neighborhood becomes much less livable. And if we put in 2 dense buildings next to existing neighborhoods, it essentially condemns those as being livable, and it will just sort of march out. You can go down in West Oakland, where they've built 5-story buildings all the way out to the limits, and it's Alphaville. It's not very pleasant. We're going to be, for the demands of right this moment, we are going to be sacrificing our sustainability and our culture. The other last, and I just want to close by saying, the notion that culture does not depend on the kinds of forms that are built and the way that a community is structured is ridiculous. If we build tiny apartments that are too cramped, where there is no setback, it's going to change those people's fundamental relationship to nature and the environment around them. It's going to determine what kind of people live there. It's also going to, if you build the wrong, you can't destroy a neighborhood, expect low income, people of color, working people to be able to afford to hang around while something new gets built. We can't respond to the demands of the moment as expressed by well-heeled organizations and sacrifice the culture that brought everybody here to begin with. Thank you.
It's interesting. I'm Margie Wilkinson. I'm with Friends of Adeline, although some of what I might say may not be agreed to by other members of Friends of Adeline. I'm happy to follow this gentleman because I was going to start off by saying that I don't get the sense of urgency here that I think we need to have. Capitalism is dying, and it's trying to take the earth, the planet we live in, and all of us with it. Housing has become a commodity. It should be a human right and a socially developed and maintained operation. Homelessness is growing. Today in the LA Times, there was an article about the increase in homelessness. And you know what the conclusion was? Not that there's not enough housing, but that the rent's too damn high. People can't afford to live in the places that exist. Nationally, it is estimated that there are 6 vacant housing units for every single homeless person. In New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says it's 3 vacant housing units for every single homeless person. Okay, and you can't talk about developing the Ashby flea market without talking, at the Ashby Guard Station without talking about the flea market and the vendors who depend on that operation for their living. We cannot, this is not a conversation that's going to go on somewhere else. It has to go on right here, right now. Do I want housing? Yes, I want housing. I want housing for the very poor people who have been forced out of Berkeley or onto its streets. I want housing for people who grew up in this city and can't live here anymore. But I reject the notion that we have a housing crisis. What we have is an affordability crisis. Okay, I never read an EIR before. I never even looked at one. So I started doing that because I thought maybe, I gotta pay attention to what these people are saying and what, and I was deeply disappointed that the EIR rejected the issue that Friends of Adeline brought up at the very beginning of this process, which was that one of the environmental impacts that must be considered must include gentrification and displacement. That's not in, and there's an explanation, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I was very pleased to see that the plan calls for electric, solar, and whatever you call this, units and all the buildings. But there's no discussion about something that I've just recently become aware of, which is the environmental impacts of construction. When you build tall buildings, really tall buildings. You use materials that the creation and use of which is an environmental disaster. You can build relatively tall buildings. I think 7 stories is pretty tall. I wouldn't want to live in a building that I couldn't walk out of. So I'm just saying that that's not in the environmental impact report as far as I can tell. And there needs to be much more about how we save our community and save precious institutions like the flea market.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Berkeley Adeline. I used to be the maternal child health director and then the health officer for the city of Berkeley. And I want to try to connect the issue of the health status report. Could I just see a hand of how many of you have actually seen or read the health status report? 1, 2. Wow. So y'all don't mostly know how serious the issue is around health and the contributing factors to the health of people of color, in particular Black folks. This is a problem if we don't even know that in our own city. And that is so critically connected to housing, so critically connected to housing, and so critically connected to our mental health, or lack thereof. And the fact that so many of us are homeless, and the lack of homes for us to go to. So when we come before bodies like this, I mean, I'm nervous. I'm sitting before all white folks. This makes me nervous. Some of you may have a little bit of mixed blood in you, I don't know. I have a little bit of mixed white blood in me. I know that. But it really makes me nervous as a Black person to come before you. You gotta understand that. And you gotta understand that level of oppression over years and years. Yeah, I'm a doctor, damn, but that don't mean nothing when I'm walking down the street with my Black grandchild, very Black grandchild. That don't mean nothing with what I am. And the ability to purchase a home, that don't mean nothing if I walk in there with a Black face. And Berkeley is supposed to be so progressive. And I really applaud you, Alicia. You guys have done a lot of work and a lot of changes have happened in the process of developing this plan. And this idea of putting down this comment about 50% affordable housing, that gets us a little ways, but I think we need a lot more. And I underscore that it's directly connected to our health. And if you're not reading that report, you don't know how connected it is. So I really encourage you to do that. And I encourage you to, yes, try to reverse some of this displacement that has gone on with an appropriate way to also improve our health. And so what does that mean? That means for adequate housing for folks that have been driven out of the city. I mean, if you look over the last 40, 50 years, we have gone down in terms of African Americans from, what was it, 35, 40% African Americans, down to 7% now. What does that do to the psychology of it all? Where are we going? Why are families being disrupted because of this? This is a major problem. And Berkeley is really a city that wants to make change. It will really do what is necessary and take broad, strong steps to reverse it by including in this report things like the right to return of people that have been forced out of Berkeley. Things like the right to stay in Berkeley.
That's right.
We've just seen an instance of that where someone was almost forced out, and it was the community that came together that helped him to stay in Berkeley. We need to be able to stay. And we need to be able to buy, and we need to be able to rent in Berkeley, which means a whole lot more rent control and a whole lot more stuff that we need to do. So I appreciate the ability to talk here, and we're going to keep working.
I want to be just like Vicky Alexander when I grow up.
But I want to say, I'm fine, but I'm really concerned about the overall process of displacement, and especially African American displacement, and the transformation of South Berkeley from someplace that, culturally really fostered and nourished a Black community to a place that increasingly does not. And I was going to quote the same figures that Dr. Alexander was quoting about the loss of the African American population in Berkeley. And also to echo what Marty Wilkinson was saying in terms of we don't have a housing crisis, we have an affordability crisis. Yes, we need more housing, but it needs to be affordable housing, not just affordable, but affordable to low income, very low income, extremely low income people. And that brings me to the specific, I have a lot of concerns about this plan, but I'll just stick to my biggest concern at the moment, which is that big idea of 50% affordable housing, which includes moderate income, which is very high. So not a fan of that. But even with that the 50% idea, I can't see how the plan actually implements that. The nuts and bolts of the plan don't actually get you there. The incentives, the increased density and height don't get you there. Those percentages are based on the base project, not on the entire project. And the plan does not, firmly establish that the BART site will be 100% low-income housing, for example. So it's just completely unclear to me how we actually get to that 50% number. So I'm really concerned that whatever the intentions of the folks who wrote it, that will function as window dressing and a distraction of what is actually in the plan. I also think that 50% of new construction being affordable is not enough, especially if it is moderate income, and that we need even more than that. And I know that that is difficult to do with the tools that exist or that have been commonly used, and so we really need our planning department and our planning commission and our city council to be champions of new ways of doing things, really committing to the goals that we have and finding ways to get there. And I think that the planning staff and consultants have worked really hard on this plan, and I know they've done a lot of engagement, and we're going to keep on engaging and pushing so we can really get something real that really serves the community. So I was also troubled that displacement is not in the draft EIR. If the EIR can consider the impact on the senior population and their access to senior centers, for example, why can't it assess displacement? Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. John Lau, a resident of the neighborhood and here with South Berkeley now. I've titled my comments this evening as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. If that's okay. First, the good. I want to commend staff and the consultant team for a very admirable job at confronting some difficult issues head on, going into this process when everyone was very aware of the mistakes in the past and the need to acknowledge those and talk about them in a very direct way. And I think they've accomplished that, and the plan presents those past mistakes and current context in a very sensitive and honest way. Similarly, there's a lot of good narrative about how we should address this plan and use it as an opportunity to address those past mistakes. So I commend staff and the consultant team on the job well done. The bad now. Unfortunately, the latter half of the plan, where we get into specifics and implementation mechanisms, doesn't quite match the rhetoric of the first part of the plan, where we talk about the issue and the need to address it head on, but we're not provided the tools sufficient to actually address the problem in a positive and impactful way. Which leads me to the ugly. Many of us saw this story in the news a few weeks ago, where 4,000 applicants applied for 28, I think, or 26, 28 affordable housing units in Oakland, just our neighbor to the south here. So that's a sense of the scale of the problem that we're in. 4,000 people, it's not even people, that was households, so it's more than 4,000 people trying to get 28 affordable housing units. That's the magnitude of the problem that we now face. Bring that closer to home with our Adeline corridor plan. The 20-year build-out presented to us in the plan, assuming a 50% affordable housing rate, I think comes out to about 36 affordable housing units a year for the next 20 years. So 36 affordable housing units per year for the next 20 years. Do we honestly think that we're moving the needle sufficiently to address the problem? We are facing a roaring wildfire and we're being given a garden hose to address it. It's simple math. Let's assume 100% of the units discussed in the plan are provided at affordable level. 70 units per year for the next 20 years? Is that much different? It doesn't move the math. So, which begs the question, what are we really doing here, and what's the choice that we're at? Is the goal to come up with simply high numbers that sound good? We pat ourselves on the back. We got to 50, we got to 100, we've done well. Or do we really want to take this opportunity to address the mistakes of the past, like we've said, and our elected say, and our policymakers say? And if we do want to take that path, please direct your staff to go back and present additional tools on how we can get more out of this plan, more housing, more affordability. Thank you very much. Please direct your staff to do that.
Good evening to the commission, to the staff, and to the community. My name is Deborah Matthews. I'm a resident of South Berkeley, a founding member of South Berkeley Now, and a former commissioner to this board. Our city cannot reach its full potential while so many of our residents and growing segments of its workforce face barriers in participating and contributing as consumers, as workers, as entrepreneurs, as innovators, and as leaders due to the need for affordable housing. Every community member here tonight must realize and know this very simple and critical point. The Adeline Corridor Plan will govern our community of South Berkeley for the next 20 years. We must raise the bar for Berkeley housing development. We must mandate immediate implementation of an equity and inclusion diversity impact report that sits right next to our ERI. Long-term solutions require equity. We don't have that representation by our leadership in this room tonight. Set equitable goals, performance metrics, and reporting framework. Require supported projects to advance equitable development. Ensure accountability through monitoring and enforcing. Local and target hiring of our local residents and underserved workers in both construction and ongoing operations of projects. Job training, including access to apprenticeship and job certification with living wages. Creation of permanent jobs that provide living wages and career pathways for our community. Construction opportunities for small businesses, communities of color, and women-owned businesses. Developers must provide community impact reports that outline how they will meet these expectations, provide data for their performance metrics and assessments, the impacts of the project, and the potential displacement of our at-risk, low, and middle-income communities. These reports should be made publicly available all during the process. Equitable development goals and standards should be integrated into planning and land use policy. Community impact reports must be submitted by developers and businesses, indicating how proposed projects will impede or advance the community's equitable development goals. This should be taken into consideration when approval for all projects that come into the community. South Berkeley has waited for economic and social justice since the 1960s. Commit $50 million out of Measure O to build 250 units of nonprofit sponsored for very, very low income, extremely low income, and unhoused people. In addition, dedicate money from Measure P for operating subsidies.
There is a housing crisis. There is a housing crisis need for housing. There is a crisis need for safety. We must stop pedestrian death and critical injuries to our residents by calming the traffic in the heart of our community along the Adeline corridor and Martin Luther King. There is an economical crisis in our community, a need for small businesses in our community that serve us directly every day, meet our needs, dining, banking, medical, and shopping. We call for sustainable action now.
Good evening, I'm Tim Frank, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods. I'm also speaking this evening on behalf of the Alameda County Building and Construction Trades Council. There's a lot to like in this draft plan, and we really want to commend the staff for the tremendous work that you've done. I think the first step of gathering a lot of input from the neighborhood has done quite well. I think there's an acknowledgement that meeting the needs of the existing residents, both for housing and for jobs, is a critically important goal. And at least in a narrative form, that's actually reflected quite well in the plan. The commitment to affordable housing is, I think, admirable, and it's a model. We have not seen as much affordability asked of any specific plan anywhere else in the East Bay, and we think that this is a step forward. One of the key strategies to help make that work is to combine affordability by design, land value capture, and public investment. And this plan calls for all of those things. More of it, all of them actually, is a good idea. When you look at affordability by design, it's really important to recognize that both affordable housing developers and private land developers or privately financed developers are going to be looking for the same thing, which is that the more floors that you get within a certain limit, as long as you're not bumping up to a level that will require a different construction technique, the more affordability you get on a per unit basis. And that's actually really important, because for the affordable housing, it just means that you can build more units where you can more deeply subsidize them. And for the market rate units, it means that if it's cheaper to build per unit, there's a little more capacity to support the aggressive inclusionary requirements that we all want. So the height and density and the FAR are all critically important to helping support the very aggressive affordability goals that we're looking for. The second thing I wanted to focus on is the question of the labor standards. South Berkeley is a blue-collar part of town. It's one of the few remaining parts of town where you actually have substantial numbers of construction workers. But if you look at the practice of developers in Berkeley over the last 10, 20 years, you see very few of them have actually been using local apprentices. And we think that it's really important to build into the plan a commitment to actually making sure that if you're getting the bonuses of this plan, that you're actually using apprentices on the job, so you're training people for a decent career, and that you're providing paid health care. These are things that the council has already suggested they'd like to see on a community-wide basis, but you have an opportunity to put something in place in the Adeline corridor a little bit quicker, and that would be a good thing to do. The final thing I'd like to comment on is the EIR. Just quickly, if the no change in the street corridor was analyzed as the environmental impact, what that suggests is that you were looking at an LOS standard rather than looking at the BNT standard, which is what the newly published consumer guidelines have encouraged communities to adopt. We have not seen consistently that communities have embraced that, but it's an opportunity that you have, and actually point you in a better direction towards the approach that actually emphasizes pedestrian safety and reduce BNT and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we'd like to see that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Willie Phillips, and I am here actually to several things. I'm a member of Friends of Adeline. I'm also the chair of the Economic Development Committee for the NAACP. And I'm also a board member of RCD, which does development. resource for community development for those who are not aware of. And we do affordable housing. So I think I can wear that hat as well as I've been behind this Dallas here. So I have some knowledge. But I also understand the very fact is that I'm also, more important, a long-time member of this community. I've been here for 60 plus years, and I've seen a lot of changes. And I also realize the very fact is that part of those changes you can see for yourself, because who's represented in this room actually says a lot. Who's at this Dallas says a lot. It only applies, the very fact is that part of the planning is to be able to connect the dots. But it also, I know that I was here a little earlier and there was a referral item that indicated essentially that there was some council items that were referred to the Planning Commission. And it spoke about, gentrification and displacement. And needless to say, that must not be very important because I don't know how many particular items that are on the referral, but certainly it reflects its role again. And it also reflects the very fact is, what are you saying about the very fact that those people who are obviously affected are not in this room? I also have to ask, why? Maybe because many of the items that are being referred are not relevant to those people. They are basically trying to survive. They're trying to hold on to what they have. And in many cases, what's happening is that they are affected by the fact they're not going to be here. The displacement issue has already happened. I'm fortunate enough to have a family that's not going to sell. So you can, all your realtors just say that. We're not selling. But we also realize the very fact that the important part of being able to connect dots is not by a report, but it's by the fact that you have to come up with actions. There are a lot of things here that I actually have an idea of what can happen. Did you know that actually BTEC has a $200,000 grant that they're not using to basically apply to apprenticeship? That should be in the plan. The very fact is that health issues are very much affected by poverty, that are also affected by displacement. That is in actually the Federal Reserve report that was just issued recently. Now, the very fact is that we can do better. We can do better. We don't need a plan, we need a plan of action that can basically connect the dots. Again, I'd like to thank you for the time to be able to speak to you, and I commend those of you who've done the report. But one thing I'm going to ask again, I want to see essentially a workshop on displacement and gentrification. Can that come up in some form or another? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alice and I live one block over. I heard you say something about reducing Adeline between Alcatraz and Woolsey to 2 lanes, and it's already backed up, that whole space. If you reduce it down to 2 lanes, it will be backed up all the way to Ashby. The fumes for the people along, it's not backed up on Adeline, it's backed up on MLK. The fumes will be terrible for the people who live here. The second thing I wanted to say was, how the heck can you create 850 housing units in the Ashby parking lot? According to my calculation, it says there's going to be 50,000 square feet of space on the ground floor for retail space. That means that you have to have 90 units per floor on the second floor to the 10th floor to create 850 units. So does everybody in here realize they're planning on building a 10-story building in the Ashby parking lot? That's the only way you can fit them in. So I would, being a creative person, I said, why not keep the parking lot as it is? The exterior dirt areas, please create a community vegetable garden there. And then why don't you subsidize 4,000 homes in Berkeley that are 1-story high to build, to raise their houses and build units underneath, and then get people that are unhoused into those housing units.
4,000. I mean, I just pulled that 4,000 out of the hat because somebody said 4,000 people went online to get 28 units. You guys are proposing 1,450 units. I calculated if the city had a contractor and you could get every house raised for $100,000, which maybe is cheap, and get another unit under there, you would have a good sized unit. Now these 850 units can't be more than 550 square feet. Because you take two 12 by 12 bedrooms, that's 144 and 144, then you have a living room and a kitchen area, that's another 144 square feet, and a little space for a bathroom, and that's 570 square feet. So we're talking about crammed in. Now the base of most of the houses is about 800 square feet if they're single units. And you know what, if they popped up in all the different places all around Berkeley, we wouldn't feel the impact. Yeah, it would look a little weird that this house is down here and this one's up there, but it's already like that. It would kind of be consistent with the look. So I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be very environmental. I am not a genius, I'm just your local beekeeper. But I am dyslexic and I think outside the box and the digger hasn't gone off, so that's pretty much all I have to say.
Hi, Suzanne. Can you hear me? To speak to the EIR mostly. The plan has wonderful goals. It's like apple pie, we can all agree on it. But the details, the devil's in the details. And right now, the EIR is kind of limiting us because we didn't study more housing. Only 250 more than if we didn't do anything. That is not very visionary. I mean, that's really disappointing. So we really need to study more units. Minimum 2,000, maybe even 2,500. I mean, a quick back of the napkin by an architect I know. He said 2,500 you could do here. When we did the downtown plan, I was on the planning commission. We studied 8 high-rises. We ended up with 4, but that gave the planning commission and the city council the room to see what if. Right now, we're limited to 1,450 and 4 lanes of traffic. We want to have 2 lanes of traffic to prevent pedestrian injury and allow bicycles and allow the vendor spaces along Adeline, farmer market, flea market along Adeline, in the plaza. The other thing that the EIR doesn't have in it, and the plan doesn't have in it, is anything to do with Ashby Park. There's no zoning proposal for Ashby Park. I mean, after 5 years? I mean, come on, people. We need that included in the EIR and in the plan. It's not TBD. I mean, why did we spend all this time? We'll have to do another EIR for Ashby. That's not what we bargained for it. We're going to meetings for 5 years. We need Ashby Park in the plan, the zoning needs to be in the plan, and 150 units average, dwelling units to the acre, average. That can still get us a huge plaza, ton of green space. We did the calculations. Alfred True did the calculations. You can easily get 1,000 just on Ashby Park. And then the other place we have, we want the developers to build more housing on their private property. And we want workforce housing too, not just very low and low. We want that also, but we need houses for teachers that are affordable. You know, they cannot afford market rents either. We really need housing for all, everyone, not just very low income. We can subsidize that with our Measure O funding. Yes, we need $50 million for Ashby Park. We need a commitment from the city for a minimum of $50 million for Ashby Park, Southbridge. And we wrote a long letter, SBN, with a lot of detail. Jerry, you did get it probably Monday. You probably haven't had a chance to read through it, but that has more detail that you can refer to. And we'll be sending you more comments and we'll be at the subcommittee. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm over at Great Brown Park, and we have about, I want to say about 45 children that are enrolled in our program. And my comments will have to do specifically with one person in this room. And that person is the baby in somebody's arms. Because all of these plans will be the early childhood experiences for children growing up in this community. Will they be able to cross the street? Will they be able to use these new kiosks that we were at the Lauren Business Association talking about? Will they be able to see the sunlight? So I'm just asking that in your decisions, that you consider that these plans will impact the lives of children for the rest of their lives. And they will be the formative memories that these children will have of this particular community. And this will be their reality for life. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Andrea Pritchett, and I serve on the board of Community Services United, which operates the Berkeley Flea Market. I've also been a resident of Berkeley for going on 40 years. I lived in South Berkeley for 20, 22, 25 years. And I guess I want to encourage you to go back to page 11 of the packet, where it talks about the 5 strategic goals, and so that we don't lose track. I think sometimes the desire to build buildings overtakes sort of the desire to do what's best for our community. And so I'm sort of seeing things through that lens. I'm a teacher here in Berkeley as well. When I look at the 5 strategic goals, although I admire the work that's been done, and I know that, and I really appreciate your additional comments, Alicia Shen, tonight regarding the historical designations and including that information in the binder and expanding and appreciating the history of this area. I guess what I'm asking is, in those 5 strategic goals, I think there is one mistake, and I'm asking you to look at the use of the word affordable. And the meetings that I was at were meetings where people were saying, we need low-income housing. We need to address a crisis. We need to address an emergency. And I feel like that gets lost in this long-term planning. We had 15 people die on the streets of Berkeley this year. Homeless, unhoused persons. A man we need 300 was right here in this building a couple months ago, crying about the fact that he could not get housed. And it just feels, I don't know why we're doing this. Is it so that we can take care of our community and address community needs? Or is that so we can provide opportunity for some folks to make a lot of money? And it doesn't feel good that way. I'm accountable to vendors who've been, trying to struggle, make their living here for decades. That's who I'm accountable to. And if I go there and say, hey guys, do you want to move over onto Adeline Street and risk your business and risk the legacy of this market so that some developers can make a bundle building apartments for people who've never even been to Berkeley before? Seriously, and I appreciate Deborah Matthews' comments about Berkeley first. As a teacher, the kids that I taught 10, 20 years ago, what jobs do they have now? What opportunities were missed? They moved out of these communities. And we're breaking up families. Do we have a right to a history? Do we have a right to a community? And if we do, then we need to push back. We need to push back on the UC, which expanded its enrollment in such a way that it increased the population of our town by 10% in a city with a housing crisis. What is the market manipulation that's going on? Why is so much of this crucial space vacant in our town? And so I propose, if we're going to do all this development, let's have a vacancy tax. If you have these buildings sitting empty for month after month, year after year, by God, maybe market forces will come to bear. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Menopepel. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. I immigrated here to join my husband. And When I came here, we used to live down here on 1238 on Ash Street. So he was working and also selling at the Berkeley Free Market when I joined him. So he came here 1984. So when I came here, I joined him. I was a nursing assistant, I was a teaching assistant. I did everything, but I was still joining him at the Free Market. Free Market became like our home for the weekend. Unfortunately, he passed 2002, before we bought our house the year 2000 on Stanford. Our daughter was born 1998. She's 20 years, second year at San Francisco State, and she studied medicine. So for the Free Market, even though I have a lot of storefronts from the Free Market, I was able to get a storefront. I couldn't rent anything from Berkeley, so I went to Auckland. City of Auckland gave me a storefront at Frank Ogawa Plaza. I know my sister here. So I was at Frank Ogawa for 10 years, then I lost my lease. I moved to on Telegraph, which I'm still there. I have a storefront. But on every weekend, I have to come to the Free Market. For the past 30 years at the Free Market. So I'm pleading that the Free Market, I'm raising my daughter to finish school. She wants to become a doctor in this country. She's the second generation in this America. I want to be able, her father is not here, and I want to be able to raise my daughter by coming to the Free Market and sell. Because I closed the storefront from Monday to Friday, I close it and then come to the Free Market. So I was pleading that you all should save the Free Market for me so that I can be able to raise my daughter. Thank you.
My name is Kayla Marin. I too am with the Berkeley Flea Market. I am on the board of the Berkeley Flea Market along with Ellen and Andrea. And I do hear a lot of people mention it, but in the abstract. And there's an idea of what is Berkeley and what keeps Berkeley, Berkeley. And there's a lot of people and a lot of communities that have been pushed out. But the flea market, the uniqueness of this is that it's 47 years it's been in the Ashby BART station. For 47 years. And many of those people have been displaced and yet still travel miles from wherever they are living to be at the flea market on the weekends. So they have had a commitment to Berkeley that deserves more than the abstract, that deserves more than the idea that we fight over. And isn't it crazy that we would have to be broken up over scraps of an area here, or land here? Because I tell you, the Trumps of the world don't have to argue between bread and between bread, housing, and they don't have those, but that we would have to scramble over that. That's a frightening thing. So, community, culture, the flea market, drums are being played. Life is happening, and these are people that have a right to Berkeley. These are people that are Berkeley. So you make a dense space, you bring in even more people that are not part of that culture of Berkeley. And who's to say what complaints you have? What tries to push out a market that's been there for 47 years? What changes the whole demographics? And these are people that, they're not asking you for the housing. They're not asking you for that. They're asking you for the space to be free and to come and be Berkeley every weekend. And that's something that's worth preserving more than in the abstract.
getting a sense of what may be coming to San Pablo Avenue. I want to speak up and congratulate your staff and the consultants for coming up with an innovative local density program that provides more affordable housing than the state density does. It will provide 40%, 70% to 100%. The density bonus, if the local plans adopt, the density bonus would be varied between 40%, 70%, and to 100%. So you can go from, for example, 100 units to, I think it was 168 units, and then to 200 and some, and then. Where is this video? But you still never get more than 50% affordable housing occupancy. Awesome. Just like on the website. Okay, cool. I want to remind you that the project, I don't remember the name of the project, north of University Avenue, parking lot there, they're going to build 142 units for affordable housing. It's going to cost $110,000 for 142 units, $750,000 a piece. And this is for low-income housing, including a dormitory that was going to provide a shelter, and 30 or 40 units for people on very low-income levels, so they're not going to be really fancy apartments. $750,000 a unit. So you wonder why housing doesn't get built. It's expensive. I would suggest, for the people that want to know how to get a remedy, I would suggest that the people sue the state legislature. You could create the causes of action on behalf of the public, the homeless, the poor. You could frame ways of compelling an action that the city council, the planning commission, and the staff cannot do. They're required to follow the law. And the law sets up parameters within which you can operate. And property owners have rights. And so there are limits to what can be done. Approximately, forcing a landlord to put in more than 20% affordable low-income housing would violate the property rights. There are other ways to handle the problem, but you have to compel the legislature to do that. And the way to do that in this culture is not to cry and scream at the local planning commissions, but is to form a piece of legislation and sue the legislature and compel them to come up with a law that protects the people that live in this state.
Thank you. Thank you.
I could go on.
Good evening. My name is Tom Yamaguchi. Like the last resident spoke, I'm actually from West Berkeley, from the Adeline corridor. But I am here speaking in support of the neighbors who spoke in favor of less cars and more housing. Our city council has decided we are in a climate crisis. I agree with it. So projects like this make us need to think, how seriously do we take this crisis? If we just think that housing and transportation are not that important, that means we don't really believe there is a climate crisis. So I would like you to consider that as we develop this Adeline corridor plan. I just want to also mention that I just recently read the book Generation Priced Out by Hrng. I know a number of people who have spoken tonight have expressed concerns about displacement, gentrification, threats to culture, loss of culture. This is a good book that I would recommend everyone to read because it answers those questions. And the answer, a major part of the answer, is more housing. More housing at all income levels. Certainly more low-income housing, we certainly need that, but we also need just generally more housing. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Hello, Planning Commission. I'm Betsy Baggert. I'm South Berkeley now. We were very, very disappointed with this plan and with the EIR funding it. In particular, we're disappointed with the low number of units being proposed. 1,450 units is not any different from what current zoning would allow. Why have we spent the last 5 years on this plan if we're just going to be doing exactly what could have been done anyway? We think that the corridor could support twice that many housing units, and we specifically ask that the draft EIR include an alternative of a much higher level of housing, 2,500 units, please. Secondly, we are very disappointed with the draft EIR because it does not provide an alternative of significant narrowing of Adeline Street. Adeline Street is 180 feet wide. It's because it used to be a railway corridor. It could be narrowed significantly so that there could be one traffic lane in each direction, and there could be bike lanes, and there could be a big public plaza built to house the farmers market and the flea market, a permanent place for them. So we ask specifically that the draft EIR include an alternative of a smaller number of traffic lanes on Adeline, 2 traffic lanes, 1 in each direction. Number 3, this EIR, draft EIR, does not consider the regional climate impacts of this project. We are in a climate crisis. The only area of emissions that are going up and not down are from transportation. 40% of the state of California's climate greenhouse gas emissions are from transportation. 60% of the city of Berkeley's are from transportation. And the reason for this is that too many people are driving their cars way too far. And regionally, it's because people are being forced to live so far from where they work. So this draft EIR needs to analyze the regional climate impacts of the alternatives. And in particular, it needs to use vehicle miles traveled, not level of service. Level of service is an antique way of analyzing traffic impacts. Please don't use it anymore. There's actually state legislation being proposed now to forbid it from being used in EIRs. It only is based on getting traffic to speed faster through our neighborhood, and we all know because we've seen these horrible pedestrian and bicycle crashes in the last several months, that that's the last thing we need, is more traffic speeding through our neighborhood. So instead, the draft EIR should be basing its analysis of transportation emissions on vehicle miles traveled, not on level of service. Finally, we ask that the draft EIR and this plan, and that you, the Planning Commission, require a feasibility study to be done of the proposed development standards and tiered incentives. It's actually recognized in the plan that nothing might ever get built under this plan, but we don't know because there's no feasibility study. So please ask the city to do a feasibility study to accompany the plan. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Chini Lee. I've been around Berkeley and San Francisco area for almost as long as Philip. After living in 22 years in San Francisco with the higher buildings going up and the density and the community completely changing from the 60s and moved to Berkeley. Been in that, spent 10 years overseas doing medical work completely for free out of my own pocket. That cost me thousands of dollars, and came back to Berkeley and found out, ooh, things have changed economically here in so many different ways. I came back almost dead, and it's taken me about more than 20 years to recover from just overwork. But I want to be just attention to all of you here on the planning committee, you have been the children, I think, of European ancestry. Am I right? All of you? Well, I'd like to present to you an idea of thinking out of the box and understanding that we can have it all. All the affordability, all the access, all the roadway, all the affordable housing, and the gifts for our children. In the past 50 years, by the way, I also spent 30 years renovating and building housing in my previous younger years, since I'm almost 80. But I stopped driving my car, even though I'm disabled. That bike is my wheelchair. Can't walk very far without it. But I decided I don't want to root this earth anymore. For that reason, what is her name? Hrng, the 16-year-old. Her family has stopped riding airplanes. I think that is fantastic. Her family, one of her members is a musician who does concert tours. She gave up being a musician and stopped riding on airplanes. I'm asking and urging you to have a bigger vision of thinking out of the box and see the 50 years in Europe, they have built communities, whole cities without cars. Have you heard anything about that? You should look it up. It's on the internet. All these cities in Europe have built their cities and completely changed the planning, and there are no cars in the cities. So I urge you to think out of the box and what's the word that somebody used? Do a feasibility along those lines. If your heritage has thought about all of this in Europe, I urge you to follow their example.
Is there any more public comment? We do? Sure.
Hi, Christine Schwartz here. This may not seem relevant, but I think it is. I was at an Oakland City Council meeting last night, and we got rent control for duplexes, etc. So go Oakland. The Oakland City Council meetings are different than ours. You have to sign up to speak, and it takes a long time to do that. But the other thing that I noticed was there are a lot more African Americans there than here, and in meetings that show. And I was really disheartened in that comparison. It's really evident that people are being pushed out, and it's very sad to me. So, what I'd like to see in this project is affordability, of course. If it were me, 100% affordability, but I don't know if that's possible. I'm not too familiar with developing all these plans, and I know that building takes a lot of money, but the crisis that we're facing, I don't know why it's not imperative that we build affordability. I mean, people are dying on the streets. People are dying in the streets. It's not something small. That's huge. And I know we don't have a connection to people who are on the streets sometimes, and we really don't get it because we're so busy in our lives and we're doing a lot of things. But when you know somebody, I did recently, it's horrible. And I'm gonna continue to talk about it because I think it deserves the time and the consideration. There are seniors out there are people with disabilities out there are people getting sick out there. Why don't we have 100% affordability? What's going on here? This is the community. We're speaking to you. We're voicing our needs. I know it costs a lot of money to build. I know that. I hear that, okay? But we're losing lives on the streets. Don't we get it? We need to do something. Please work it in this plan somehow. That's what I ask. I ask for me, I ask for the people who died, the voiceless, who are no longer here with us. I ask for the people who couldn't come, who are disabled, the elderly. Make floors. People with seniors or disabilities, ground floor. Make it accessible. Make a floor for homeless people. Make a floor for, families. Where's the grass in this plan? Where's the pools? Where's the playgrounds? Okay, thank you.
Anyone else to give public comment? Okay, I know a few of you haven't spoken yet, so I think rather than closing public hearing, we can keep it open while we give comment in case anyone who hasn't spoken yet decides they want to comment, and we'll close public hearing at the end. So there was a request that we all use the microphone. It doesn't extend. I'm wondering if it might be okay with the commissioners if we kind of just go down the line and each of us take 2 or 3 minutes to say our thoughts if you want, and you can pass if you want. But I think that might work best with the microphone. Some of us on this end can scoot down there to use the mic. So Steve, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure.
And try to keep it to like 2 or 3 minutes. We are over 9 o'clock and this facility closes at 10 o'clock. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay, so now we're talking about the Adeline corridor plan, right here, right?
And the
EIR. Let me start out by saying that to require 50% affordable units in any new development has an implication that nobody has spoken to. And that is, there will be 50% market rate units in that development. Now, we have a glut of market rate units in this town. You go anywhere in the town and you see now leasing, renting, for rent signs on market rate housing. What this plan will do is simply add to that glut without providing enough units of affordability. So, as long as there's a glut of market rate housing, it should be 100% affordable for anything that's built in this zone, the zone of this plan. Okay. But what has to be dealt with first are 2 things. One, and this has been raised, the question of displacement. The question of displacement, there has to be a structure and a feasibility of stopping any displacement while any of this is being considered and then built. And the second one is infrastructure. If you're going to build in a transit area, in a transit center, so that nobody needs cars, you're only dealing with one end of a person's life, because they have to get in that car to go someplace to have a job. Does the public transportation get them there? If it doesn't, they need a car. You can't set up a situation in which there are no cars unless you can take care of that eventuality. Lyft and whatever else it is will not do it. They need to have that flexibility. Okay, now, there was one other thing that I wanted to clear. We have this, what I call non-serious attitude toward housing on the part of this plan. Okay? We have already seen that non-seriousness in effect, because while the plan has been developed over the last 4 years, starting in 2015, this city has permitted a number of large projects in this zone which will not provide affordable housing, or very many. And the city was not able to tell those developers, no, we're forming a plan for this area. You will have to wait to make sure that what you are proposing is going to fit in with the plan that we are going to come up with. Because the city did not do that, they have undermined and undercut the seriousness of their own plan. And this is something that has been raised by the neighborhoods around Adeline, what was I going to say?
Steve, you can come back if you...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
One more point. Because what has been raised by the neighborhoods is that if there is going to be a new development in this area, it needs to be in tune with and in accord with the income levels of the people in that immediate area. That is, if you're going to build affordable units, they have to be affordable to the people who live in that area itself. That has never been dealt with by the city in developing this plan. There have been no surveys of areas in this corridor or where new developments are going to be built. There's never been a survey as to what the income levels are that would have to be responded to by the new developments. Now, that means that this plan is something that by somebody who had said in the public comment, an abstraction. It's an abstraction that's coming from above, from a bunch of elitist thinking, without the real participation and without the real knowledge of what the neighborhood and the area in which it's going to be imposed really is. And so it's useless. I would have to vote against this.
Thank you, Steve. I forgot, Jeff had said earlier to me he has childcare responsibilities, so we're actually going to switch over to this. And if you can project, maybe you don't need the mic, but let's check and see if people can hear you, or if you want.
Okay. Can folks hear me if I talk this loud? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Then you can say it.
My wife is out of town and I have to get my children. So I guess, thank you all for these comments. I'm so glad to see so many people here. This has been, I would commend the staff. I mean, clearly this has been, a long and a robust process. And I think it's my read of the plan and the EIR. I mean, it was well written. And I thought it was a thoughtful set of documents relative to the things we have heard up here so far and my limited interaction with that process. So thank you all. And I actually would especially thank you for the short sort of summary memo that was in the the Planning Commission packet. If any of you didn't want to spend time reading the 208 pages of a full plan, read that because it's very well written, so thank you.
Where do we get it?
It's in the agenda that's online. There's copies back here, but the PDF is online. The PDF is only 30 pages.
Okay.
Our agendas are always online. So I think there's a lot to like in this plan, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I kind of said it's not ambitious enough, and I'll say more about that. But most of my comments here are actually going to be questions to staff. And unfortunately, I may miss those if I leave. But I would like to hear a description, and maybe there's not time with this one, of what the proposed parking requirements are. Because we didn't really talk about that in the presentation, and I would sort of like to hear that. I would like to hear staff's opinion on why level of service was used, and there really was not a use of VMT. I mean, as one speaker said, The state of California is certainly moving in that direction. AB 743 has done that. There's not a requirement around that yet, but it's obviously coming. And so I see this as an opportunity for Berkeley to do that, particularly given Adeline. It's the widest street in the city of Berkeley. And in some ways I was disappointed to learn that in this plan it will remain the widest street in the city of Berkeley. So I would like to hear some options on that. And related to that, I was hoping to see in the EIR a look at an alternative that did look at one lane in each direction. One auto lane in each direction. So I wanted to hear kind of what the pros and cons were of doing that and not doing that. You know, whether that means there's a second lane, but it's a bus rapid transit or something else. Can you hear me? Okay. And then another question, quickly, is there was a brief mention of it, but I was curious if there was any hook in with the, dare I say it, federal opportunity zone program. Someone did mention it earlier, and is there an opportunity? I have my opinions of that program, and I'll save them for another time, but does that apply here? Is there any opportunity within that opportunity zone here? So my feeling is that I think it can be more ambitious in terms of the number of units, period, across the board. And I would make one more comment. There was a lot of discussion from community members about market rate units and then below market rate units. And of course, there are varying levels of units that are below market rate, right? I would highly encourage you to read the presentation that was given to us a couple of meetings ago in this room by Rick Jacobus, who is on the consultant team for this project, but he's a national kind of housing finance expert. And I learned a ton on his modeling out how housing and market rate and below market rate works and how it costs out and how you forecast what can cost out, giving assumed revenues of various sources. And this was structured in a way to do a 50-50, right? 50% market rate, 50% below market rate. And it's a very, very, very clear description of how that works. And then we can certainly have a discussion about whether those assumptions in that are accurate. But I thought it was I learned a ton, so I would encourage folks to look at that.
So we can find that where?
So that is, staff can tell me what the date was. I could look in here. I think it was two meetings ago.
March 6th. But that was also presented at the community meeting last Wednesday, May 29th.
The woman who was videoing here, Christine, is that right?
Yes.
I actually rewatched it on your Facebook feed, I think. So it can be watched and he can be heard. So you can talk to her about it.
If you sign up on the email list or look on the website, there's a link you can sign up to. Then after this meeting, we'll definitely re-share those links.
So those are my comments, mainly questions. I imagine you won't get to them now, but maybe you can take them down.
I'm happy to address them first if I could.
I know some of them might take longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the first question was about BMT, and I appreciate that comment and question. The EIR did do a BMT analysis. The reason that we were bound to look at LOS is because the city, of course, is required, mandated by the state to have BMT standards by July 2020. It's in process. We do not have adopted BMT standards right now. That's why we are forced.
Can you tell us?
I'm sorry.
What those initials
BMT means vehicle miles traveled.
What's the other?
LOS is a level of service which measures congestion, and it measures congestion related to a scale of A to F. A being the least congested and F being the most congested. And so the change now, which is required by the state legislation, is saying that we're not really measuring better or worse based on congestion, because there's a different thinking now in terms of what actually is environmentally superior, especially in, I would say in terms of like urban areas. So vehicle miles traveled is a new standard. There's cities, like our neighboring city, Oakland, San Francisco, they've already adopted their standards, but we don't have those yet. So in terms of CEQA, we have to go with what our adopted standards are, but for informational purposes, we did include the VMT.
So level of service is all about getting a car efficiently from A to B. VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is saying, oh, if you're building something or developing something, you're attracting all of these vehicles, which is going to create miles traveled, which are going to create greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
So it kind of flips the script.
Great.
Thank you.
Can you answer on the parking requirements one? Where is that in there?
Yeah, the parking requirements is in chapter, it's in chapter 3 in the development standards, in terms of private development. So, let me just page to it for a second. What this does that's different from existing zoning is that it introduces parking maximums instead of, the lower tiers still have parking minimums, and that's in part somewhat to address our incentive standards in the sense that once you get to our higher incentive standards that require more affordable housing, you just have a parking maximum and there's no parking minimums.
Okay.
But the specific standards, let me see.
What page is that?
38 and 39. It's the tables.
So you'll see, in terms of the base development standards in Tier 1, you'll see for residential parking, there's a maximum of 1 per unit and a minimum of 1 per 3. And then the commercial parking, there's a maximum of 1.5 per 1,000. And then for the higher tiers, you can see that 1,000 square feet for commercial parking. Sorry.
Okay. And is the VMT analysis, is that in?
That's in the EIR. It's in the transportation and traffic chapter of the EIR.
Okay.
And then let me just see, you were talking about the lanes. So I think that's in terms of reduction of lanes. We're taking those comments and we're gonna look at that. Right now, what you see in the plan is sort of a result on the feedback that we've gotten to date. We developed these right-of-way concepts. They were shown in 2017 at an open house that we had at Ed Roberts. They were shown again with revisions and more detail in 2018 at an open house that we had, which included not just right-of-way, but also looked across the board at different concepts that you see with the base of this plan. So that's why they are what they are. But we're happy to take that comment.
Melissa, did you show a 2-lane in that?
Yes.
Ed Roberts?
Yes.
And why didn't you, so what, you said people didn't want that?
No, well, the comments that we got, you can look at the open house summaries. We have all those summaries online. I'm happy to, right now, since we're hearing this, we can take that comment and look at it and talk about that.
So, thank you, Jeff. I know you have to go soon. I kind of messed up the order, but do you want to continue going down? There's a microphone right there.
Thank you to staff and the consultants, and I could really echo many of Jeff's comments around the quality of the work, and not to mention the comments about where the plan can be more ambitious. And I first have one disclosure. Ashby Bart now, I ate one of their cookies, so I want everybody to understand that. It was quite good. Thank you.
What did you say?
I was disclosing I had a cookie from one of our constituent groups here tonight. Yes. Quite good if there's any left. We want full disclosure here. Transparency.
Oh my God.
I would say one of my biggest questions was why the EIR wouldn't study a much larger number of units. Not because that might be the preferred plan that ends up, but someone in the development business that commissions EIR, we're always interested in having a larger envelope in case the world changes again 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. We've got an EIR that would cover those impacts. So I think the initial 1,200 units that we can build today and the 1,450 that we can build into the plan doesn't, in my mind, meet that ambition. I do differ with Steve. I think supply is important. I don't think we have enough housing of all types. And I may not have found it, but I thought I found a little bit of an inconsistency. There's language supporting very low, and moderate income housing, which I think is as it should be. But then there are plenty of places where the moderate housing was dropped and it wasn't mentioned at all. So as someone said earlier, we do have homeless people that need help. We have low and moderate income people that help, and we have some of the other backbone parts of our society, like teachers and others, that make too much money to take advantage of subsidized housing, that are having a really hard time competing in the market as well. So I think an increment of moderate housing is a very strong housing policy. I was moved a little bit tonight by comments by a young lady that started her small business at the flea market and moved into a small space and has subsequently moved to a greater space. And I think the plan really should not only encourage that, but support that. And I'm not sure what exactly the mechanism is, but just like we subsidize housing and we require developers to subsidize housing, I think subsidizing some of that retail space could really help the little economic engine which exists over there. So I'm not sure how that would fit, but I think that's would add to a sustainable retail strategy. Now, displacement was discussed. That is not reviewable under CEQA. So there was a little bit of anger that why didn't we study displacement? Is that correct? Displacement is not an environmental impact per se under CEQA. Is that right? I'm asking our CEQA consultants here.
I mean, jump in if the exact standard, as you'll see in the EIR, is actually if they're physical persons or units that are displaced as a result of the plan, as opposed to, the socioeconomic effects, because CEQA focuses on physical environmental effects, and that's defined in a specific way by a lot of case law. And also, I guess what we've talked about before is that the vehicle to look at these effects is the plan. And so the policies and strategies and the implementation actions in the plan are really the focus of how to address some of these issues.
That was my point. I just wanted folks that were concerned about that to hear legally that it's not an environmental impact, but the plan should address it. That's my point. If there are any displacements that occur because, say, small apartment buildings are demolished to make way for much larger apartment buildings, I think we need a robust system of payment for those folks that are displaced and the right to return. So should that happen, I think we need to make sure that those folks can not only be paid to suffer that indignity of losing their house or their apartment, but have the right to return back to Berkeley, and we heard a lot of that tonight. A couple comments. I think the 50% is a really ambitious goal. I support it, but I'm working on a large project. It's 1,100 units. It's half market. It's half affordable. It's very difficult to make that work, that 50%. I think you found a decent balance. I know lots of people don't think we need any more market rate housing, but we need more housing of all kinds. So I would just say, for those of you who don't think it's ambitious enough, there was a gentleman that said, if we set it up in a way that it doesn't work at all, we're going to get zero housing. And that would be my concern.
Well, I will add, I don't know, can you hear me?
No.
I will add my thanks. I know this was a lot of work, and I know that there was a lot of community involvement through the process, which I think everyone on the Planning Commission really is so glad to see, and it's so important. And so some of my questions be around what we heard from a number of people on the displacement, just to follow up where Brad was. it would be helpful to me, not being a CEQA expert, it's not my background, and it may help other people to, if you could just explain, if we're not going to have in the EIR a study that looks at a section that really focuses on displacement and what's it mean to build under this plan, and what happens later after it's built with respect to displacement. If you could explain how it's in the plan for people to know that that's really being addressed, because it's not clear to me. So we heard we're not going to see it specifically in the EIR, so how are we going to know that we're really addressing displacement to the full extent of our ability to address it?
I mean, how do you throw in?
Did you want to ask?
Do you have a response to that?
I guess I would say that what CEQA focuses on is physical environmental impacts that would occur over and above without adoption of the plan. Right. So what we're really comparing this to is what's happening today, anyway. And the difficulty with some of these issues is that there are some issues that are related to what the plan can do, and there's some issues that are entwined with the regional and national, housing affordability crisis. Right. So I guess I would just say that compared to what would occur without adoption of the plan, is that the plan puts in place, parameters of goals for the Ashby parking lots, as well as proposes to change the zoning to, to incentivize on-site affordable housing. And this is something very different from the existing zoning. So, with that, I would just say alone, there are measures that the plan is taking that's different from status quo, that is focusing on these concerns that have been talked about throughout the planning process.
Well then, let me ask you this again, just so that I really understand. I believe that you had said that the only, well, let me just make sure this is correct, is the only public land that we have the BART station. I think you said something about using the public land to really be able to try to maximize what we can do in terms of building affordable housing. So it wasn't clear to me, is there any other public land, or is BART the only public land?
Yeah, there's a map in the plan in the housing chapter, but the BART plan basically is the most, because it's a surface parking lot, right, and it's so large, that is the biggest opportunity. There are other city-owned sites in the planned area, but that would mean an intensification of like an existing building, like the fire station, for example.
Right.
So those are things that are possible, but they're much more difficult and they're more costly and they're smaller sites.
Right, and so I probably didn't ask that question very well. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the plan, just the BART site.
No, the other sites could redevelop. It's just that we're focusing on that just in terms of the largest opportunity. And the plan doesn't prescribe, like say that this, that, or the other, parcels will redevelop, but it's possible, that we could look at those other sites, but,
I understand you haven't focused on it and why, because you're focusing on the largest. So I also, on that point, looking at the BART parking lot, I know that you described what air rights are. We have air rights, the city of Berkeley has air rights on the BART parking lot, and I just wanted to understand a little bit better what that means in terms of how much the city of Berkeley can do, if anything. Well, let me ask it this way. Is it the case that the air rights allow the city of Berkeley to have some measure of control over what BART can do, but the two have to work together, that Berkeley can't do something on its own without BART with regard to those air rights?
Can I ask a question about parking? We gotta make sure that we can get through commissioner public comment before, and we haven't had a chance to speak yet. So if we'll hold additional questions and comments if there's time at the end.
And I'll try to move through quickly. I just also wondered, because of that, with regard to, there was a question about whether or not we looked at what we can do on the BART parking lot right now that there should be an analysis, I think someone suggested, of zoning, how we're gonna zone there. And the reason I was asking about what Berkeley can do, if anything, and it sounds like nothing outside of working with BART, because BART owns the land and we own the air rights, is that a reason that we haven't looked at any kind of zoning in particular for BART right now, that we're waiting to do it later?
Why right now the plan lays out these objectives for development parameters, but doesn't go so far as zoning. The specific plan focuses on, an 86-acre area. And the Ashby BART site is a subset of that, as you heard from all the conversation today, there's a pretty big range or bucket of possible desired things for the BART site. Right. Ranging from a very big range of different levels of affordable housing, which requires very different levels of subsidy. And also depending on, I think, what the plan tries to lay out really carefully is that, if you are talking about 100% affordable projects, the trade-off is, which is fine, that's a policy choice, is timed. Because of the way that the financing is set up for, low-income housing tax credits, there are only so many that are available every year. So it's trying to set up, these are the parameters that need to be, as well as what kind of amenities, in terms of the public space, as well as potentially subsidized commercial space for nonprofits, small businesses. There's a long list of wants that we want to be able to dig deeper into with the stationary advisory group and the community that we haven't had a chance to do since we're looking at this large area. Another issue is that Berkeley's fortunate that only recently, we've had Measure O. And again, this plan isn't going to decide what happens to Measure O. The Measure O Oversight Committee decides. So there are a lot of things along with, that need to be resolved. And that's why we don't get to that level of detail.
Right. Well, I guess what I would say with regard to what you just said, which I appreciate and it's really helpful, it's helpful to me, I know to other people, in terms of striking the balance and whether or not this is ambitious enough, I will say that I am very concerned about maximizing affordable housing to the full extent possible, and balancing the livability. I remember people coming before this commission and talking about the history of Adeline corridor in the neighborhood and not wanting to be buried in shadows, to still feel like this is their community, it's the community they want to live in. So balancing all of that, I appreciate, and it's one of my really major concerns. The last thing I just wanted to quickly ask about was looking at the, a lot of people have different views about whether we need, we already have too much traffic on Adeline and, inhaling exhaust fumes because it backs up, or whether or not, we should go down to 1 lane each. And again, that's balancing. But I was curious if we have looked at it, we know exactly who is driving on Adeline in terms of how we're looking at whether 2 lanes is enough, if we can go down to 1. My sense is it's a lot of commuters. It may be people that don't even live in Berkeley, but I just wondered if we have a sense of who's on that street when we're talking about all the traffic that's currently on Adeline. Do we know that?
I don't know if we have a sense of through traffic. We don't have that level of detail.
I would love to see, as planning commissioner, I would really like to know as we make very major decisions about transportation, building at transit hubs, that we really understand how people are moving through the city of Berkeley, that we're not expecting everybody to be on BART and there's no BART capacity, that we're not expecting people to be on buses and they're not running buses. So I do echo what Steve was saying about transportation infrastructure concerns. Thanks.
Echo thanks to the staff and the consultants for the report and a lot of the concerns about I'd like to see more ambitious scenarios, at least as alternatives for higher housing. We have had a few comments about whether this would require a whole new EIR for whatever happens on Ashby BART, and I would assume we should have a very high cap what we assume could happen at Ashby Park, and that would provide conservative estimates of the impacts if Ashby Park is built out to a very high level, such that any project could tier off of that without a full new, is that the goal?
That's correct.
Okay, so the goal is to provide a very conservative high-end estimate for what would happen at Ashby Park, so that we don't have to do a project level EIR when that project comes about. And in that instance, I would say we should probably have a much higher alternative for Ashby Park or some other scenarios in terms of number of units, so that when the project comes in, we're not stuck having to do new findings of significance and new impacts. I want to be cautious that LOS will probably never go away in an EIR, because you still do LOS for transit impacts, not transportation, but our transit lines and emergency access. So you still need to look at whether an ambulance can make it through. And there are, so we'll always have some reference to LOS, but it probably won't be in the traffic impacts anymore. But fortunately, it's just the gift that we'll always keep giving. But I'm most concerned about, when we talk about feasibility, and I think it's really good to look at what is feasible here in terms of ratios and amount of units. I believe this whole corridor fits in a designated opportunity zone under the Trump administration's tax bill. Yeah, most of it. And I think the baseline is, we have to realize this is a corridor that since 2005 it was listed as a priority area, or 2007 has been going under accelerated gentrification. The opportunity zone designation will just accelerate that even further. So our baseline is going to be more gentrification. It also presents an opportunity, if we can harness it, to capture that back. I'm not a finance expert, but I've been told it's up to 30% of losses can be written off. That really, to me, seems like a very high ratio. We're talking about returns of investment of 5 to 6%. I mean, the difference between building and not building, and then we talk about 30% opportunity zone designation. So I know it happened since we started planning on the corridor, but to me it blows up a lot of our assumptions and analysis in terms of feasibility and what can happen. So I think that's an important thing that we need to add in and talk about how that possibly creates opportunity for more affordable housing and ways to recapture that. And I also worry about the baseline is, if we do nothing, we're going to see even worse gentrification due to the opportunity zone. I think those are my main concerns, but I agree. I would like to see single lane analysis. I'd like to see the analysis of more units, and I would like to see a tier. We're going to see it at the state level anyways, but some more tiers and bonuses for 100% affordable housing, what we would do for those types of ratios to the extent they're even feasible.
Okay, others said, but just to echo, I agree about opportunity zones. I agree, I'm interested in a one-lane each direction study, and I really appreciate that the DEIR includes a reference to displacement and gentrification as an area of concern, and even has it named in terms of direct displacement impacts. I know we've talked about this, and I would still like to see if we can push that further. We talk about VMT, which is in there, and what would be the increase in vehicle miles traveled if residents in the neighborhood could no longer afford to live here and are commuting in from Stockton to go to the flea market or to go to their church. Likewise, the stories I really appreciated hearing from some of the folks here for whom the flea market is not abstract, but is actually a part of the community and their lives, and how they were able to build their lives here in Berkeley. So I think that that's a great piece in that connection between the flea market and local economic development. I think that it's seen as kind of a cultural institution within the plan, but I think recognition of it as an economic institution is an important way to look at the flea market as well, in terms of the income and the economic opportunity, the ability for micro entrepreneurs to establish and grow their businesses, hopefully here in South Berkeley. I did have a question about the parks. We don't have to answer it now because I know we're running out of time, but about what is the city of Berkeley's established park ratio of acres per 1,000 residents, or whatever we use? What is the citywide standard?
2 per 1,000.
And what is it?
The EIR talks about that.
What is it?
satisfied on a citywide basis.
Yeah.
And that's what the standard is, but we recognize that, when you're looking at South Berkeley,
Right.
and especially the southeast quadrant, there's not good geographic distribution.
And it's less than 2 here, is that right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't clear to me with the new rerouting of Adeline Corridor and the public right-of-way, are we actually creating new park space the way that the city defines it? Would that affect the standard? And is that something that we can do to get us closer to the baseline standard for the city of Berkeley, that we actually have established parks in our community?
Yeah, the space that we show is public space. Either could be green, could be plaza. We haven't determined this at this time. We realize part of it is, again, further design refinement and discussion in terms of making sure that there's funding, maintenance, operational programming. So those are all things that need to be determined. Because it's identified
Okay, so right now
as
it's not,
space.
yeah, public space, got it, okay. So, yeah, and I would just echo that I really appreciated the comments made tonight about the importance of displacement and gentrification. I think the plan sees that loud and clear and names it as a goal, and just looking to see where is the actual teeth to implement that and make sure that it happens, so. Yeah, all don't mind moving down.
Okay, with respect to the EIR, and I'll just say to the EIR consultants here that I have no problems that you need to respond to. I'm actually very pleased with some of the mitigation measures you suggest in the EIR, and I think some of those measures should actually be pulled into the plan itself. In particular, the greenhouse gas emissions, you suggest electrification, solar power, electric vehicle charging stuff, and new housing, and one other thing with the roofs. And that stuff there should really be a section of this plan about sustainable design. We have a design section in the plan, and it needs to be broadened to include these policies, because somebody in the audience said that 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. Well, the other 40% basically come from buildings. So we have to address both sides of that, and we have to start immediately by requiring throughout Berkeley that all new buildings be 100% electric. And we need to insist on solar being part of every building to try to get as close to a zero net energy standard as we can. So I'm very pleased with the environmental impact report for bringing up those mitigations. I'm very pleased that they even have greenhouse gases are now analyzed in EIRs, because they didn't used to be. The other thing on this whole issue of LOS and vehicle miles traveled, both are important, and as it's already been raised, I'm just going to say that the critical thing that I haven't heard enough discussion of is the impact of street changes on buses. We do not want to slow down our buses. If there was an alternative that I would have liked to have studied, and I could have put my 2 cents in during the scoping and suggested this, but I did not, and that would be to have 1 lane for cars and 1 lane for buses in each direction. The idea of having 1 lane for everything in each direction, well, you would certainly have to do further environmental analysis, which would slow down the adoption of this plan, because they would have to redo a lot of the traffic studies. The traffic studies they have done do not take that into account, so the environmental impacts would not have been fully dealt with. With respect to the environmental impacts regarding the number of housing units, I think it's going to take a good 10 years just to get to 1,450 units, even if we assume that things go really well and we're going to be able to do more than 1,450 in 20 years. So I'm not overly concerned about that, and I certainly don't think we should slow down the EIR to study that further and add more time to the consultants and cost us any more money. So there are a couple of things with respect to LOS that are mentioned in the EIR that also need to be highlighted more in the plan itself, and that has to do with bus transportation. And I just want to emphasize over and over, there's a real need when we're talking about street redesign to have a collaborative relationship with AC Transit. AC Transit does not have nearly enough money
to operate the level of service that we really need. Way more people take BART in Berkeley, but the people who do take AC Transit are often the poorest people who don't have cars and don't have any alternative, and are going places where BART does not go. And the couple of things that are in the EIR, one is the idea of bus bulb outs, and the other is the idea of transit signal priority. Bus bulb outs is mentioned using different wording in the plan, but I'd like to see it highlighted more. It's an important idea. It would be a way that even if you have reduced level of service, that buses at least can not lose too much, because reduced level of service means that everybody goes slower, and that might not be a bad thing for cars to go a little slower. It's certainly better in the sense of reducing accidents, but with respect to buses, it's not a good thing. The other thing is signal priority means that basically when the bus approaches a traffic signal, that the bus is able to keep the green a little longer so they can get through the intersection. This is a very important idea that should be mentioned in the plan itself and not just buried somewhere in the EIR. I have been through, this is like the fourth plan I worked on, and I've seen too many EIR mitigations that once the EIR is adopted are totally ignored. So that's why I want to pull some of these things into the plan. A couple other things. With respect to Ashby-Bart, one of the biggest issues we're going to have to deal with is the whole question of how much parking should be replaced for the commuters. Not for, there's a whole different issue of how much parking you need for the residents of new housing built there, which in my answer is not very much. It's certainly no more than an affordable housing developer wants to provide. But it's a different question, and I think there's going to have to be some data collection, surveys of the people who currently drive, and not just for Ashby-Bart, but for North Berkeley BART, to these stations to survey, like, where are you coming from, number one, and do you have an alternative way to get there that doesn't involve driving to the station? And there really needs to be a realistic assessment, because that needs to sort of guide us in terms of how much public parking should there be at these two BART stations. And I think the city needs to think creatively and consider the possibility that what if we took half the money that would cost to replace the parking in each BART station and spent it on creating a shuttle system. And we're talking millions of dollars that this public parking would cost, tens of millions of dollars. So you could probably do a pretty damn good shuttle system, I would hope, with that kind of money. It would depend on what kind of salaries you pay the drivers and stuff like that. But I think these kind of options need to be explored. I do think the basic principle that public land should be used for public benefit should govern the development of the Ashby-Bart site. And that means to me that we start by building affordable housing there. And I really like this plan because of the whole idea of phasing it in, not feeling you have to build it all at once, but that you can build some and then a few years later build more and keep building it. But at some point you're going to have to figure out how much of the parking needs to be replaced, who's going to pay for it. If you're going to ask an affordable housing developer to pay for replacing the commuter parking, that's going to make their projects very expensive. So we're going to have to figure that whole issue out. But basically, I do want to say that I think this plan is very good. Like I said, I worked on 4 plans. I worked on the South Shattuck plan. This plan is vastly superior to the South Shattuck plan, which had lots of good language in it about affordable housing, but had no mechanism for how are we going to actually get that affordable housing. This plan attempts to, I think Rick Jacobus and the city staff and the other people who worked on it have done an excellent job of thinking through these issues and telling us this is how it could work. What I think we have to look closely at as members of the Planning Commission is what are the specific base standards and do they make sense? Currently they're substantially upzoned from the current underlying zoning. City of Berkeley has a land value, City Council has adopted a land value recapture policy, which basically means as we make the land more valuable for developers, the city needs to get something back so that the benefits from this are not all pocketed by the developers. So we need to bear that in mind as we're looking at the specific standards, and we need to look at other things such as, should we be adjusting the fees charged for affordable housing in this area? Because our current fee ordinance, affordable housing fee ordinance, allows for fees to be set at different levels in different parts of town. And we should be giving serious thought to whether the fees should be higher in the Adeline corridor as a way of encouraging people, if that is the goal, to build the units on site so that we actually get affordable units on site. And the alternative is you get fees, which you can then try to spend on the housing on the Ashby BART. But if we actually want the units on site, we need to think about what will it really take to achieve that. I'm going to have lots more to say, but I'm going to stop now because I'm on the subcommittee, so I will be submitting stuff in about in time for the next meeting. Okay.
And we may go a few minutes over 10, is that okay?
My watch says 9:57, so that gives me slightly less time than each member of the public had to comment on this, for my comment, which is fine. I'm also on the subcommittee, and so based on that, and in the interest of time, I'll try to really limit my comments. I want to first thank the planning staff for the tremendous amount of thought that has obviously gone into this plan and work, and also to all the members of the public who participated in the forums and also come out and offer their comments tonight. That all makes this process and the resulting plan better. I want to just focus in on two particular things. One is the issue of how we actually get the affordable housing that we know we need. While I appreciate the generally ambitious framework of 50% affordability goal in new housing, I am very seriously concerned about the absence of particularized mechanisms for assuring that we get that housing under that affordable housing, especially the affordable housing at the lowest income level, lowest affordability levels, under a variety of different potential scenarios. As an example, as I read it, the Ashby BART site is the only place where any facet of the plan envisions extremely low-income housing occurring, and yet, as we've already heard tonight, it's only a set of objectives that are guiding development that will occur on the Ashby BART site. I actually think that it is possible that there is no single provision in this plan that, as it is presently written, would prevent 100%, would categorically prevent 100% of the development occurring under this plan from being market rate. There are incentive mechanisms in this plan to get us to affordable housing, and there are objectives in this plan to encourage and guide future negotiations for the Ashby BART site, but there is literally no single provision in this plan that I can find that would categorically assure that we'll be getting the extremely low income housing, the very low income housing that we absolutely have to have, and we certainly have to have some assurance that we will not have a scenario in which a high percentage or even 100% of the housing that's constructed under this plan is market rate housing. That is totally and utterly unacceptable, and we shouldn't have a plan that doesn't give us that guarantee. So I suspect that because of the amount of thought that obviously has gone into this plan, that a number of scenarios and provisions that offered more by way of assurance and mechanism and enforcement related to affordability were contemplated, and I would love to see and hear more of those from staff so that we can evaluate them as against the current version. That would be something I will be continuing to demand through the course of this process. With regard to one related note in terms of the affordability stuff, I appreciate the map of the publicly available sites. The sites that are publicly owned. I think it would be valuable to actually have a detailed inventory of those sites, because those sites are the places that offer the most substantial opportunity to get to deep levels of affordability and have high levels of control over the housing that gets developed. So I would really like to be able to zero in on on those sites and know more about them and see what we can do there. The two last 2 points. I appreciate the couple of folks who tonight raised the issue of the need for jobs-related provisions in this plan. I do think that's a substantial deficiency. There's a lot of discussion of the sort of supply side of jobs. How are we going to encourage and support business? And that is critical and essential. But we also need the measures, the types of measures that were discussed related to targeted hiring. I didn't hear fair chance hiring discussed, but we need to talk about that. And measures that assure, a support for apprenticeship and job quality as well. That is an essential component of ensuring that people can live where they work and work where they live. Is ensuring that folks in the community have high quality jobs, and so I regard that as a significant deficiency in the plan. And then the last thing is in terms of this environmental analysis, which connects up with the issue of implementation and enforcement and getting to affordable housing and displacement. As I understand CEQA, what CEQA does is it prescribes what has to be analyzed. It tells us, what is the minimum that it needs to be analyzed in order to have a sufficient disclosure of the environmental impacts of the project. It does not prohibit an implementing lead agency from including analysis in a project, including analysis of displacement and related phenomena. So we could, I suspect, unless I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be corrected, have in the draft EIR and the final EIR an analysis of displacement. There's nothing, to my knowledge, preventing that. And if that's true, then I think it's incumbent upon the city to, and as the lead agency, to engage in that analysis because it's so essential to everything that we're talking about. And that, of course, could lead to an additional set of mitigation measures that could be relied upon as additional backstops on this affordability, on this potential problem scenario I'm describing, which is the one in which the development that occurs here does not contain affordable housing because we don't have adequate measures to prevent it from not containing affordable housing. But if we have CEQA mitigation measures that require inclusionary housing or similar things, then that's an additional backstop, that's an additional thing that we can rely on, and an additional level of assurance that we'll have, that we need, that we're getting affordability, out of this whole thing. With that, I'll stop. I appreciate the attention to those issues.
Tonight, so we need to close the public hearing. May I get a motion to close the public hearing? Brad, all in favor? Yeah. Okay, with that, the public hearing is closed and meeting is adjourned.